back. Saudi Arabia is among 13 countries elected to the United Nations Commission of the Status of Women. It's a body dedicated to the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women. The election has prompted a backlash given Saudi Arabia's poor record on the treatment of women. In fact, let's take a look at the strict gender code. Women in Saudi Arabia are not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to interact with men not related to them. They must follow strict dress codes, and they must live under male supervision. UN Watch, which is a Geneva-based human rights group, has condemned this move, calling Saudi Arabia, quote-unquote, the world's most misogynistic regime. Electing Saudi Arabia to protect women's rights is like making an arsonist into the town fire chief. It's absurd, said UN Watch. This, in fact, is not the first time that the UN has come under criticism for such a move. In 2003, remember, Libya, under Muammar Gaddafi, was elected to chair the UN Human Rights Commission. Then in 2012, the UN's World Tourism Organization endorsed Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe as a leader for tourism. And this latest move not only undermines the UN's credibility, but also shows that it may be out of sync with the world and reduces the chances of Saudi women getting equal rights anytime soon. Mandy Clark, WION's London Bureau Chief, joining us live from the UK. And we also have Mahesh Sachdev, an expert on Middle East, a former ambassador and someone who has served in Saudi Arabia for many years. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Mandy, let me come to you first. How has the UN defended this move?
Well, the thinking overall, they haven't specifically made a statement, but the thinking is that if they can get Saudi Arabia to the table and have them discuss gender rights, that they would be more motivated to open up their laws and improve their gender equality. It's a bit of it's hoping that once they are on the table with nations that have more of an equal gender equality, that they will change their ways. It might, as you point out, in the past, when it came to Muammar Gaddafi and human rights, it certainly didn't motivate him to change his regime. So it looks like just a gamble at the minute.
Is that how you influence Saudi Arabia?
Yes and no. Saudi Arabia is obviously an important country worldwide. And what happens there to women is important for a billion-strong Islamic world. Having said that, there are certain things that would surprise our viewers. For example, female literacy in Saudi Arabia is 81%. 18.6% women work. The universities today in Saudi Arabia have over 60% of women students. So a lot has been changing. Now there are red lines drawn under Sharia, and if you are looking at those red lines as a symbol of progress, I'm afraid that is going to be difficult, because of Saudi Arabia's own past momentum, its commitment to Sharia, and the clergy's role in the social economy.
To not be allowed to drive? The Sharia says
exactly, something of that sort. Women have to, the logic being women have to unveil themselves to drive, and that is not allowed. So all those kind of things, those are symbols, but wherever progress is possible, it's happening.
So you're saying that all these reports about women being, well, not being given an equal status in Saudi Arabia are reports that are exaggerated?
I'm not saying that. If you're judging the equality on the basis of who can drive and who cannot drive,
I think the ability to choose,
yes,
what you want to do.
But ability to choose subject to the caveats of Sharia. That is where Saudi Arabia stands. They have ratified Non-Discrimination Against Women Convention with the caveat that whatever is in conflict with Sharia, Saudi Arabia would not observe.
Did it surprise you that Saudi Arabia made it to a panel like this that talks about women empowerment, that talks about gender equality?
As a career diplomat, it did not. Very often, election to such bodies, quote unquote, is on the basis of quid pro quo. You support our candidature for this post, and we would support your candidature for other post. And I think this is what normally happens. In some cases, the nations are determined to sponsor themselves and are willing to make all sort of compromises because they want to be seen. And President Mugabe's Zimbabwe being elected, even when there was a travel ban on him to the European Union, prompted by British, is a case in point. They needed visibility, and all 54 countries of Africa were marshaled in the name of African solidarity to vote for them.
Mandy, given the international condemnation on this one, what are the chances that that these voices will force a rethink?
It's unlikely to force a rethink. You know, the UN, it was a vote happened, and they got the majority. So I think, you know, they're going to take the condemnation on the chin. I'd just like to hop in when it comes to Sharia. It's all about interpretation. So, you know, a woman can drive veiled up. That doesn't prohibit women driving, but it's how it's interpreted. Sharia doesn't necessarily say that women cannot walk by themselves or may have every male decision made for them. And I think that, because there's many Islamic countries that respect Sharia or have it within their laws, but not necessarily to the degree of Saudi Arabia. Of course, that's all down to how they interpret Sharia law. So I still think Saudi Arabia has many laws that are seen as very gender unequal. You know, women really don't have the right or the freedom in Saudi Arabia to make decisions on their own. And I think that is where a lot of the outrage you're seeing reaction globally. Here's a country that just does not give them a voice in public. They might educate them, but they aren't there allowed at the table. And just a few months back, there was a council for women and girls. And at that inauguration, there was only men. Women were only allowed to attend via video link to watch in the back room. So it's that type of thinking that, you know, for it to be on the panel of gender equality just leaves a bad taste in the mouth of many people.
So, Mandy, how big a blow is this, according to women's rights activists, to the hopes of Saudi Arabian women of achieving gender equality anytime soon?
Well, it gives them an equal voice at the table. You know, there's two lines of thinking: that they're going to come in line with the majority of the world that sees women as equal, or that they now have a say on really important legislations on gender equality, and their voice and the thinking and the laws that we've seen in place in Saudi Arabia appears not to support equality in women. So it will just take a step back and row back a lot of the rights. You know, as you pointed out, UN Watch has called it absurd, and it's very difficult to see how they will help the advancement of women's rights in this, unless they decide to come more on stream in what the majority of the world thinks is important, to have equality.
Mr. Sachdev, where does this leave the United Nations, which, according to some, is eroding its own authority and credibility by letting these things happen?
I don't think so. I think it's better to have Saudi Arabia in than out.
Okay.
It gives an impetus, brings them onto the table to discuss the status. And I think the overall impact cannot be negative. It can only be positive. Secondly, UN has to represent all strands.
But what kind of an example do you set when you bring a country like Saudi Arabia with such a huge gender gap? Even though what you've said about the literacy figures and so on and so forth, we've been reading comments from many women in Saudi Arabia, or those who worked for their equality and empowerment, saying that this is a blow. So when you bring a country like that to the table, to the high table, for for an organization that is meant to work for their empowerment. This is...
I think the process itself needs a bit of definition. Normally, these positions are taken by popular acclaim. So there are 13 seats and there are 13 candidates. There's no election per se. This time it was like that, but United States asked for a vote. And the vote was publicized. And the Saudis got minimum of the 13 candidates selected. So all would have gone and to become members of the commission. Out of 54 members of ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, who voted, Saudis got 47 votes only, the last to be elected, quote unquote. So that itself shows that they have just the least acceptability in this regard. And I suppose that's a signal enough for you to know.
If the Saudis are taking it, we do hope something good comes out of it, though. Thanks very much, Mr. Sachdev. Mandy Clark, thank you for joining us here on Gravitas. And finally on the show, we have some images for you. Emmanuel Macron is making news not just because he is well on course to be the next president of France, but also for his unusual marriage. His wife, Brigitte, is 25 years his senior. He's 39, she's 64. They met when he was 15 years old and she was married, his school teacher, with a daughter of the same age in the same class. Observers say Macron continues the fine French presidential tradition of an amusing love life. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching.